I must say our bandwidth is slow.
Yes, it shouldn't be this, but it shouldn't be that bad.
No, it isn't, but just tell us all unnecessary things. There we go.
No, that's Skype. That's Skype closing. That's all.
That was me.
Can you hear me now?
All right. Lucy, did you try something in your Google Chrome? That's done now. It's installed. Let's try that one again. I think it's in already. Yeah. It's already there.
It's worth checking, okay? That's a quick.
We don't have.
Little
We don't have bad. Maybe I should go out,
Talk
Wayne,
about
and come
bandwidth.
back in.
Can he hear you? Because you're talking as if...
Yeah, he can hear me.
But why don't you see him now?
This is his machine. We can't hear anything.
Is he typing? Like that
You pulled out the headphones, so there's nothing else.
Okay.
With yours?
Can you hear him on the... On those?
I don't hear you through even through headsets either. Hi.
Yeah. Yeah. I suspect
I
it's,
can't hear anything, and I can see your lips moving. Speak very distinctly. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'll just watch, and we'll contribute by text because nothing else is working. I've got video, I've got audio, and nothing's working from Wayne's side. We can't hear him.
Thanks, how are you?
Should I hang up and come back in again?
You're wrong. Connected on sound. Wax. No sound.
Yeah, I'm going to try to. Say something.
Hi, Alice. Can you hear me now?
Yay! Yes. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and well. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can
Perfect.
see you in your spacecraft.
Wow, that guy's thinking sounds that you see.
I can see
So
you in your spacecraft.
I needed to turn off. I just needed to log out
And back in.
Yeah.
and back in.
So we got it sorted. Look, Alice, what I'm going to do to conserve bandwidth, I'm going to switch my video feed off and just keep the audio.
Okay.
Perfect.
I'll type questions if we have them.
Much better.
Oh no, I'll hear your audio, so that's all good.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So now, and maybe Alice, if you turn off your video feed on the camera, then we'll conserve a bit of bandwidth, because one of the disadvantages with Google Hangouts is it chews up a bandwidth if we're using video. So you should be able to hear me well.
Yeah, we can all hear you. There's 8 of us here.
Fantastic. That's more than a crowd.
Yeah.
So okay, so Alice, I know you, and of course Henty, I know.
Hi, Wayne.
And Marie
Hi.
and Annika.
Marie and Annika, yeah.
Hello, Wayne.
Hi all.
Hi.
So, yeah.
And then there's Ari and Paul, Lucy and Albert.
Paul, I don't think we've have we met face to face yet, Paul?
It's Paul, yeah. Not yet, not yet.
Oh, okay. And you mentioned Albert.
Morning.
Morning, Albert.
How are you?
So that's all good. So basically, what I thought would be useful to do with this session is maybe just to show you a little bit around some of the OERu stuff in terms of how the partners are engaging in the network, and maybe just one or two or references to the technologies we're using for the development of the OERu courses, kind of as an introduction, which will make some sense as to the next prototype we're running with the Open Content Licensing for Educators course, because there's quite a lot happening across the network, and the many moving parts. So, I thought it would be good just to touch base, because really what I'm keen to have with the next prototype offering of the Open Content Licensing for Educators course is, some kind, input and feedback from folk that are well versed in, learning design as we are moving forward with the technologies. So that was kind of my thinking of, for us having the get together. But of course, if there are any questions from your side or aspects you would like to focus on, please fire away. I mean, this is our time, and we can use it, to our best advantage.
Okay. We don't really seem to have any questions yet.
I have.
Oh, Albert's got some.
And when you.
Can you hear him, Wayne?
Yes, carry on, Albert, please.
I think it's the delay that we.
Yeah.
Wayne, to start off with, something that I've struggled a lot with last year was Unisa places on its intranet a list of open education resources that are supposedly free to use. And I'm talking here now mainly of images. And if one goes to those sites that are, let's say, advertised on our internet, you'll find that the images that you are able to trace that fall within a particular theme and that you would like to suggest to a lecturer to include in study material, those things are in fact copyright protected. So for me, I would like to have guidelines as to when is something free to use. I know one has to acknowledge in a particular manner, in a prescribed fashion, but I would like to be clear in my mind when I advise a lecturer about the use of resources, be it images or whatever. When are these things free to use?
Yeah.
Then there are other things that we could perhaps cover at a later stage, and that is if you find something, and Alice has helped me here, something that is copyright protected, then there's a way to search for a similar image that may be free to use. But for starters, just when do I know I can use it without being, apprehensive about consequences?
And I want to add to that, he's talking about we start with search engines that are specifically set up for Creative Commons. Carrie set them up. There's a whole series of search engines for different things, images, activities, OER courses, and whatever. And maybe the first page is Creative Commons, but the minute you click away, then you're off the Creative Commons and you're into the mixed group, and when you finally get one you like, it's actually copyrighted. But you thought you were doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Finished.
Yeah, we've got a bit of latency with the time lag with the bandwidth, so we'll be fine as long as we don't interrupt each other. Albert, an excellent set of questions, and again, Alice, you're right. Even if you are working with dedicated Creative Commons search engines, you may find that pages link to resources that are all rights reserved copyright. So this is a complicated area, and in fact, this is what the Open Content Licensing for Educators course is really about. It explores the legal underpinnings of what things we are legally allowed to reuse and remix. And it gets quite complicated. Even if you're working with the Creative Commons suite of licenses, there are 6 Creative Commons licenses, and some of the things are are not remixable in some of the license types, so it actually does get a bit complicated. So we will certainly be addressing within the Creative Commons course, or the Open Content Licensing for Educators course, the foundations for what things you can remix with other things. And so the interesting thing is with Creative Commons licenses, it doesn't mean that it's copyright free. The copyright holders, in fact, do retain all the economic rights as the original copyright holders to those artifacts. It's just that they license the reuse of those artifacts under particular licensing requirements. So it's not entirely correct to say that we're looking for resources or images that are copyright free. Even with Creative Commons, the original creators still hold copyright on those articles, which is a little different from the public domain. But I mean, those kind of legal aspects are the things that we explore in the course. The actual practicalities of advising lecturers and academic staff of where to search for resources, it's not necessarily that easy, because I mean there are a whole range of places where one can search for OERs and available resources, but you actually need to have some pre-knowledge about what things you can legally remix with each other. And so those are some of the aspects we cover in this course. But my advice is I'll need to just go and have a check at the link that the OER portal, Unisa Open, or whatever the portal is called, the link that is provided to search for those resources, because there actually might be better links where the search results will only display artifacts which you can remix, instead of directing to other websites which contain non-free resources as such, or resources which are under all rights reserved copyright. But it's a point well made. The stuff is extremely complicated and extremely complex. When we start, moving into digital rights management of content, it's a quagmire and a minefield. And so, I mean, the approach that we've been using is to point faculty and academic staff to repositories where there are only free resources available, to avoid this problem where the search results direct to other artifacts. So it's an excellent question, and there's some of the issues we try and address in this course. Any other questions?
Wayne, thank you for your response. I want to add something, and that is that at times when I thought I discovered something that I was going to be able to use, I tried to read up about the kind of license that is associated with an item, and cannot understand that language. I mean, it is English, and I can make sense of everything, but I don't know what the legal implications are of what is spelled out. So if in this course we could have clear indications of, I'm sure you, when you refer to the different
Yeah, I'm just checking. It looks like the audio has dropped out, so I'm not sure if you're picking up my audio. Maybe just in the chat window you could indicate a yes if you are picking up my audio. But I suspect we do have some latency issues here. Yes, I mean, the course actually does focus on navigating this quagmire of licensing. I mean, the big issue comes in, relates to where somebody that has got an all rights reserved copyright on certain artifacts and then applies a custom license, which is not a Creative Commons license. And then the whole remix and reuse issue does get considerably more complex, which is one of the reasons we advocate the use of the de facto international standard of Creative Commons licenses. So I'm not sure if you, yeah, I think you might have dropped out there, Alice.
Yeah, it went off and the whole screen refreshed. Hinty had a question about, say it again, Hinty?
What extent Unisa is on the road to change their copyrights, and is it important for us to engage or ask for a special project if we want to engage in an OER project? In other words, where is Unisa generally still, and where are there some openings in that membrane?
So, Henty, an excellent question. To be honest, I mean, I wouldn't be able to comment in any finite detail of where Unisa is in this process of intellectual or licensing reform. I mean, my reading of the OER strategy that was recently approved by Unisa is that that is one of the items which is on the agenda, is in terms of Unisa is going to be having a close look at what the implications are for licensing policy within the organization. From my recollection from my years back at Unisa, the default copyright of all educational materials that are produced by staff at Unisa in fact belong to Unisa. So the copyright holder at for educational materials produced by the academics and the professional support staff, the copyright belongs to Unisa. And how copyright works is the standard copyright is default, all rights reserved. And so reading the OER policy, Unisa is actually going to progress this agenda. But insofar as the OER university collaboration is concerned, Unisa has made a commitment in terms of the OERu collaboration to assemble 2 courses, or in your language, I think that might be modules or spaceships or whatever the local hierarchy is.
Yeah.
That you're using. But the commitment from Unisa is that they will be contributing 2 course units to the OERu, and that will be under an open license. So as the copyright holder at Unisa, those copyright clearances will be provided for insofar as the OERu collaboration is concerned. But I suspect that there's still going to be considerable discussion and negotiation around the revisions of Unisa's intellectual property policy and how they're going to navigate these futures for OER. But that's kind of sort of outside my authorities or remit in terms of the negotiation. I'm not sure how fully I've answered that question, but it would be good to touch base with Kerry and see what they have planned in terms of moving that agenda forward.
Thank you, Wayne. Yes, I was under the impression she'd be here today.
She's in another meeting. She gave her apologies for joining us.
Thanks, Wayne. That is clearer.
Wayne, I know that one of them for the OERu was the critical reasoning module that was taken from a College of Human Sciences. Do you have any idea what the topic was of the other one?
Was the English. There was an English one.
Oh, was that the English one?
So the one course contribution which was quite definite was the critical reasoning course. And I have to say, it's an ideal candidate for an OERu type of audience, and because logic is, it's just such a popular choice around the planet. And I've actually looked at the print version of the materials, the traditional kind of ODL version as we know it within the Unisa context. It's an excellent course, and I would really love, to see that this course developed for the OERu environment. It just has so much potential. There's still a couple of challenges with the development. If I'm looking at what has been done so far, it still has a very, very sort of print-based kind of presentation to it. And that's not a critique. I mean, that was kind of the starting point. But there are some creative solutions. that we can adopt in terms of taking that forward. Officially, Unisa has not made a second course nomination or contribution yet. My understanding is that the priority is to kind of get the critical reasoning course sorted, to sort of, and so that we can learn from the experiences in that development. To date, thus far, in terms of the development and setting up those course materials, there hasn't been much kind of sort of learning design input. It's been more about kind of trying to convert the print-based materials. My understanding is that Kerry has located expertise to assist with some of the web design stuff related to the course. But it would be great, to get additional inputs from some of the learning design dimensions, because designing for this environment is actually quite interesting. Because what we're aiming to do with the OERu environment is design in such a way that we don't exclude learners who, for whatever reason, don't have access to 24/7 connectivity or affordable 24/7 connectivity. So it's an interesting design challenge, but I believe the kinds of technologies we're using will enable us to achieve those goals. So it's a very interesting prototype.
Okay. Yeah, I mean there was a DCLD input in the course when it became print. It had a big revision. And then with the assessment with Callum Scott and Elby Vandenberg. But it's been a long time since that happened, and that was before they were even considering going online, because especially it was a high student number. So it was when we were only going online for the postgrads at that point. So I was a bit surprised when they decided they had decided. I'm not sure who the they was at that point. I think Kerry had maybe just been appointed. And the college and them had decided on that, but I don't think there was any additional then learning design gone back in to turn it into the web, let alone for an open source and open course kind of thing, because it was, as far as I know, it's still based around 2 MCQ assignments and stuff. So I know that the assessment had to change.
Yeah, and to be fair to Kerry, that decision predated her arrival by a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And Marie had a question.
No, I don't have a question. I just want to mention that they struggle with problems. They have to translate the study guide to a Google environment, and it's not a my Unisa environment. It's a new platform.
Yeah.
So
I guess that's what the technical people. The web designers, I think, are just Google programmers. I don't think they're web designers. That's what I'm afraid of.
There's none of our people DCLD allocated to that as a project.
No, it's not a DCLD project. Yeah, Ella Viljoen from Unisa Press, but now graphic designers are doing it for the Google platform. Yeah.
And just to pick up on Marie's question, I mean that is an extremely valid point, because it's a challenge we are facing within the OERu network. You'll appreciate, I mean, we're now a partnership of more than 32 institutions worldwide, and every institution has their own learning management system, right? I mean, Unisa is using Sakai. We have got partners that are running Blackboard. We've got Moodle campuses. We've got some Desire to Learn campuses. Some folk are running Canvas. So you'll appreciate the challenge that thinking of designs that can integrate in local learning management systems across the entire network create a number of interesting challenges. And that.
Are you going for a big? Sorry, is it going to be then a Google platform? Is that pretty?
No, it won't be a Google platform, and the reason it won't be a Google platform is because the OER Foundation, as a non-profit entity and a distinctive policy commitment to being distinctively open, all our technologies must be open source technologies. We will not use any proprietary delivery systems for the OERu network. in terms of the materials that we host, and that's a very strong philosophical commitment as the OER Foundation. But by the same token, we need to design these courses and materials in ways that will be easily integrated into whatever systems and platforms our partner institutions are using. And so that is the challenge. And I can show you examples and talk to how we are addressing those challenges. But Alice, you had a question.
No, it's for a different topic. It's for that. So I'll talk to you on that, about that on email. So I won't waste everybody's time with that.
So okay, so that's one challenge. Is how do we design materials in a way, putting aside all the pedagogical issues of localization, because that's another interesting challenge, right? So my discussion at the moment is really just looking at some of the technical aspects, setting aside the complexities of localization for different audiences across the world. But if we start looking at this purely at a technical level, one of the other challenges we need to address, and in fact one of the reasons why we haven't used a learning management system as the core technology for developing OERu course materials, is also well-founded. One of the big problems with learning management systems is they do not scale well for large numbers of learners. If, for example, we were to, and the OERu model is going to grow, we will be working with extremely large cohorts of learners who will be working through independent study materials that are hosted through a central infrastructure, who will then be requesting assessment services from the partner institutions within the network. And if, for example, somebody designed a course and there are a couple of thousand learners enrolled for that course, and some facilitated and said, "Oh, won't you please go and check, click on my discussion forum post on that I posted on Tuesday afternoon, and if you have a couple of thousand learners simultaneously clicking on that resource at the same time, it creates a huge demand on computing resources, and most learning management systems would, or the servers would crash under those levels of demand. So we've had to find a creative and innovative solution from the OER University's perspective, because we're a charitable organization and we don't have copious amounts and big buckets of money. And the way that we deal with that solution is to distribute the computing power across the internet. And so our course designs, although simple at one level, are actually quite sophisticated, in that we host the materials or author the materials in a central repository that we can easily integrate into a variety of delivery platforms, but we distribute the interaction technologies across the internet. And so for those of you that have been working in the space and following what's happening will be familiar with the concept of personal learning environments. And so what we do is we distribute the interaction technologies across the internet. And so learners work with blogs to develop their own blog posts. They might use Twitter or other forms of microblogging. And we've got technologies that are able to harvest and aggregate all those contributions into a single feed on the OERu websites. So the learners get to use their own technologies that they want to use in the OERu context, and we aggregate these technologies together in very interesting ways. Coupled with that, and just a quick point, another reason why we don't use learning management systems as our primary authoring environment is that it is extremely difficult to support collaborative authoring in a learning management system. So for example, let's say that we decide to collaborate with Unisa in Sakai to do some collaborative authoring. I come in and you give me password access to the particular courses in your online environment. I go in and I make a change. You are not going to know about the changes I've made in that environment. And so in this kind of development environment, it's extremely important to have a detailed editing history for collaborative authoring. And so the solution that we are using for the OERu is that our authoring environment for the central authoring of courses is a wiki. We use the Wiki Educator platform for central authoring, and for the prime reason of having a detailed editing history that is manageable. We could use sophisticated open source repositories for open source code development, but the problem is the average kind of educator doesn't have knowledge of those systems. So we use a wiki as the primary authoring environment, but the wiki is not our delivery environment. We are developing a number of interesting technologies that would enable any OERu partner institution to take a snapshot of the course materials and apply their own style sheets and custom branding for integration in their local learning management systems. And this is where the real value of the OERu network lies, because in theory, at least, putting aside localization issues, Unisa would be able to integrate any course within the OERu University network within their own learning management system without spending a cost in development. And so this is why we've had to spend a lot of time thinking about what are the technologies we should be using for the authoring environment. Now, while the authoring solution we've adopted has all these advantages in terms of strict revision history, we can facilitate collaborative authoring on a global scale, which is scalable to the extent of sort of the Wikipedia levels of traffic. The disadvantage, of course, is that authors still need to have some sort of level or understanding of how a wiki works. Because what a wiki is it's a flat hierarchy. It's essentially just a collection of pages. And so this is where the learning design component is so crucial in the work that we're doing, because it's about structuring pages in a way that facilitates and supports learning. So we've done quite a lot of prototyping in this space. And as we move forward, and part of this prototyping is the next instance of the Open Content Licensing for Educators course, where we are prototyping some new developments, and where I'm keen to get feedback from professionals such as yourselves, taking into account that this is a very open source model. We have a philosophy of releasing early and frequently. Our vision is not, within the open source model, we don't release perfect products with every iteration. We rather have incremental steps where the best product we've developed at this point in time, we release, we test it, we get feedback, and we have these iterative cycles of improvement.
Well, Wayne, I have a question about this, and it ties in with the copyright issues that are going to come up, but it's specifically around learning design. A lot of the OERs that I've seen are so content-driven, and because we've been designing for an LMS, we are designing for those interactive tools that are most used, that are easy for our low bandwidth situations. How do you write a course without those interactions in it? We have a whole communication structure to the storyboard, a whole interaction structure. How do you design those interactions without having, okay, discussion forum will happen on every tool, every platform, but it's not just the content. You know what I mean? It's not just the study guide. That's my biggest issue with the learning design for an open system. How do I make it open, but I don't know if there's going to be a cohort? So how can I make a discussion forum required, but there's no one to talk to necessarily? How can I make, well, you've got to go and read somebody else's blog, but what if nobody else is on the course at the same time you are? You know what I mean? So the whole cohort issues, start times, end times, how do you build in pacing? Is it going to be a one-year course? Is it a one-month course? Is it a one-semester course? Can you use the same thing for third years, make it a month, for first years, make it a semester or a year? You know what I mean? All of these kind of issues. I know you could design it for your individual institution. I know you could build in that infrastructure for an institutional course. But if I'm designing a course the other way around, if I'm going to design something for OERu, how do I make it so generic, but it's still teaching in the way I want to teach?
Yeah, Alice, excellent set of questions. I mean, clearly coming from folk that have been designing for a long time. So the way that we tackle these challenges within sort of the open source sort of way of doing things is we have this mantra of rough consensus and running code. And what that basically means is, within any development, we try and achieve a rough consensus to solve the problems we're dealing with, here today, rather than trying to solve the world's big picture. And I mean, all the questions you raise around, are we dealing with a cohort? Are we dealing with this? How do we make design so generic that it can, how do we incorporate the interactions? I mean, those are critically important questions for any, total design. But the approach that we've been taking in the OERu is recognizing that we aren't going to be able to answer all those questions with a single design intervention. So what we're doing is we're taking a very incremental approach. We define the parameters for a particular OERu course, and we design within those parameters. But we design those courses in a way that will be able to feed in to the total solution or the total picture for the future. So just to give a very practical example, one of the design principles is to design in a way that courses can scale. So what that means is, even if you've only got a small cohort of maybe 30 learners, you can design pedagogies that would be sufficiently intimate for 30 learners. But if you had 1,000 learners, they would still be equally, effective. So the issue is designing for scale. And Alice, we've actually done this. I mean, the fascination. I mean, I've always had a big chuckle with the first MOOCs. That George Siemens and Stephen Downes had launched, talking 2,500 learners. I remember the first course I convened at Unisa, we had 12,000 enrollments. That was a massive, 2,500 is, is a walk in the park.
All of our courses are massive, whether or not.
Yeah. But the point being is, we can design, if we know, we must design pedagogies that can scale. And within the OERu model, exactly. So within the OERu model, which is quite important, is the OERu model is a no-frills model. I mean, I don't want to necessarily use this as an example, but if we think back, in fact, to the origins of Unisa, when Unisa was still an examining college of the University of London, what the OERu model is basically doing is providing, course materials that learners can work through as independent study modules without tutorial support. Now, I'm not making any pedagogical value judgments on that. I'm not suggesting that that's a preferred model. But the reality is, because of the funding issues around philanthropy, we cannot provide high levels of tutorial support on these courses. We just can't, because you can't scale it and you can't afford it. But
I think that was the whole.
Yeah. But what we can do is we can develop innovative designs that actually start ramping up the peer learning support components of the course. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Terry Anderson's work around the interaction equivalency theorem. But basically Terry's been on about is, if we take the three forms of interaction, the theorem basically says if we ramp up any one of those forms of interaction, we can just about do away with the others. Now, I mean
Yeah,
that's a hard it's a hard pill to swallow for some academics, but the research seems to support this view. So what the OERu model is actually doing, it's ramping up the peer learning components, the peer-to-peer interactions, the student-student interactions, to a greater extent than lecturer-learner interactions. And so that's how the model works. And it's based on the premise. If there are 1,500 folk in a room, the likelihood of 2 people knowing the answer to a question is plausible. It's not only the academic that knows the answers to all questions. So that's sort of the high-level philosophy of this model, and I'm not suggesting that this is a substitute for high-quality ODL. The challenge we are trying to address is widening access to folk who will not have the privilege of registering full-time at Unisa.
But maybe that's the question. If we are about providing resources, then why call it OER University? Why not call it OER Resource Repository? Teachers can go there if they need it. People can go there individual to get the things that they are self-study, things that can build in the interaction with a few people or with your family around you. Even if you're the only one with access, you could still build in the interaction around that. But I mean, maybe it's the idea of calling it a university that's kind of setting it up for trouble. Because, I mean, a university does have a sense of a dialogue, from Plato on up. I mean, way back.
Yep.
The whole thing of the dialogue and the somebody judging what you say. It's maybe the time is gone. I mean, the young students these days are doing other things. They're looking for information. People, to me, a lot of the OERs are being used for information as a resource, not particularly as a full course. Maybe it's not a bad thing.
Oh, absolutely, Alice, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And this is what is the distinguishing feature and the point of difference of the OERu. We are the only international network on the planet that is working and has agreed to provide formal academic credit to credible credentials. You can go to any of the XMOOC providers, any of the CMOOC providers, and there's soft options and open badging and all these wonderful things that learners might want. But the reality is the majority of learners who are excluded from a tertiary education are looking for real credentials. And that's a significant point of difference of the OERu model. We have made a concerted agreement to providing credible credentials. So learners who seek summative assessment services from Unisa will be getting a Unisa credential. Learners who are at the Basque University or whoever in this network. And this is why, it's one thing to develop a bunch of OERs for a bunch of soft options or feel good or whatever reasons one might be developing stuff. It's entirely something different to be developing OERs that are going to map to courses for real credit, where learners are going to sit real exams, earning real degrees, and that's a significant point of difference.
But I also think maybe that's also part of the scalability, because some of those soft option courses and the ones like Psych 101 and Interpreting Your Dreams and What Freud Has to Say About Your Mother kind of courses, which get a whole lot of people taking them, will pay for the others. Even if it's just so much you're paying for just admin fees or whatever. I mean, I see a lot of the courses on,
Yeah, and the big challenge with the XMOOC providers is they've now set the benchmark. Those courses will always be no cost. There's been some interesting, there was a recent bit of research out of Penn State, one of their MOOC offerings. They actually asked their learners how much would they be prepared to pay for this. And even at $1, they lost the majority of folk that would be prepared to pay for this. So I think the whole idea of subsidizing through these free learners is actually not a viable model fiscally.
All right, all right. I just knew that someone who does a Udemy class for
Yeah.
$10, I think, to sign on, and he's got, he gets pretty good full load, but some courses are up to $100 or whatever, but it's still cheaper than a couple of thousand at the university.
Yeah. So the interesting thing with the OERu network is, I mean, you would know this from my previous lives. It's something I don't readily admit publicly, but I trained as an accountant in my first life, and the fiscal the fiscal model of the OERu is very solid. We are on the 70% break-even threshold of being a fiscally self-sustaining model, in order to provide the infrastructure that provides the sort of free learning stuff. And our individual partners, their investment is all guaranteed because the recurrent costs are guaranteed. So Unisa will be charging an assessment fee for whatever summative assessment services they are providing on a cost recovery basis, or even a profit margin if Unisa wanted to do that. All the partners have decision-making autonomy around those aspects. And we were one of only well, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know of an OER collaboration that has achieved a self-sustaining or fiscally self-sustaining project. We are on the verge of achieving that objective. And when we reach that break-even threshold, we're going to be in a very interesting space, because then any surplus revenue we generate, we will be reinvesting back as a charity for developing new courses for the benefit of the network. So it's a very, very interesting model from that perspective.
And I guess that's the whole point for this course, right? Is that one of the things you need to be is more legal than legal. So this whole issues around copyright and licensing and whatever, if you're going to be the only one that's self-sufficient and fiscally responsible, the others are going to come after you. So they're going to be looking for any way to sue you. So I suppose that is a thing for all of us. I mean, we know that Unisa's got a big...
Exactly, Alice. And we'll get into the course around these issues, but it's one of the reasons the OERu doesn't use any materials that carry the non-commercial restriction. And the reason for that is there are a whole range of legal complexities around the non-commercial restriction, which I won't go into here. But and setting aside the philosophical issues of, while on one hand the United Nations Declaration recognizes the right of every individual on the planet to earn a living, why would anybody want to exclude somebody the right to earn a living kind of debate. But it's one of the reasons we do not touch non-commercial materials in our core course design, because assessment services could be perceived by some copyright holders as being commercial. So we spend a lot of time thinking through these things. And you're absolutely right there.
Ari's got a question.
Yeah. Hi, Wayne. It's Ari. I have a question and a comment. The question is, about 4 years ago, UNESCO embarked on an internationally accessible set of modules or space capsules, whatever you want to call them, regarding journalism and communication. It was driven from their French base. I just want to know, if something like that was being designed by UNESCO, it kind of starts to talk the notion of an OER. Are you aware of that material that was written and was supposed to be piloted in 3 countries, or not? That was the question.
A good question. My response is I'm not familiar with that particular project. My suspicion is, as you mentioned, it took place a couple of years ago. In those years, UNESCO still would have had a default copyright all rights reserved license, which would have had a number of implications for it. However, we know that UNESCO has agreed to adopt Creative Commons licensing. I mean, this is something we've been working on for many, many years. So that situation is going to progress. I'm not sure if you're aware, the OERu is in fact a designated project of the UNESCO Commonwealth of Learning OER Chair Network. So we do have the prominence of association with both UNESCO and the Commonwealth of Learning in what we are doing. Yep.
Okay, thanks, because they piloted the test in South Africa and in Malaysia, I think. But thank you, that does answer the question.
So what we should do, so what we should do there is, if you have the links to those resources, you can either send them to me or you can approach UNESCO directly, and we can ask them to consider adopting their new policy of releasing them under a Creative Commons license. The issue may well be that in the particular course there might be third-party copyright restrictions, which I'm not sure of. But if UNESCO actually contracted the development of those resources, they would own the entire copyright and then would be able to release under an open copyright license.
Okay, I can follow that up for you. If I find something, I'll link it up with you. Thanks, Wayne. The comment I have was regarding the peer learning component. I'm very interested in this, and I have been for a while. The comment I have to make is successful peer learning, as proposed by those that talk to active learning regimes, like Mazur and Richfelder and others, tend to happen in the science thinking field, where students have first choice taken on engineering, for example. It seems to be a lot harder in the social science related fields. And it's just a comment. That to me is a big challenge. It's much easier to get a bunch of engineers and mathematicians or chemists to talk and interact with each other and do peer learning or even peer assessment, as opposed to that in the social sciences. It's really rhetorical for me right now, but I'm just raising it for you.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think you're absolutely right. And again, this is why the challenge for learning design folk like ourselves is so crucial in figuring out, well, how do we leverage peer learning, for the humanities.
Yeah. Thank you, Wayne.
I think it's harder for the lecturers than the students.
Oh, yeah, agreed.
Welcome to education, Alice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I see our time is getting pretty close to running out. So just basically two things. If there are not any other questions, there are just basically two things I'd like to just highlight. In terms of how folk can engage in the OERu planning process, and just sort of a brief heads up on what's going to happen with the prototype course. So if there aren't any other questions, I can quickly run through that over the next couple of minutes.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, so basically, so in theory, if I can get some desktop sharing going on here.
Yeah, I saw your PowerPoint ahead before we started.
Oh, there's no PowerPoint here, Alice. That's
Open Office presentation thing.
Oh, it's not a
Thingy,
presentation.
slide-ish.
Oh no, it's not a presentation thing.
Okay.
One of the neat things with Google Hangouts, it actually talks rather well with desktop sharing on a Linux machine, so it's quite useful. So one of the unique features of the OER Foundation and the OERu collaboration is we subscribe to something we call open philanthropy, which basically means we subscribe to radical transparency in everything we do. So the entire planning of the OERu initiative has, since its very early inception, has been conducted openly and transparently in WikiEducator. All our OERu planning meetings have been streamed live. with carefully planned breakout sessions for our remote participants. So, you know, we have a very, very strong commitment to open and transparent planning. So what I wanted to just quickly point out to you is actually how, if you wanted to, be able to engage in the OERu planning processes. And so one of the, you know, the metaphor or the analogy I often use, you know, if you join a new organization within your first week, it's not easy to be able to figure out where, you know, your way around the organization, where all the policies are, you know, where all the venues are, all those kinds of things. And similarly within the OERu, as this international collaboration spanning 5 continents, it's not that easy to figure out where everything is. And you know, that's you know, the nature of open and transparent development. But what I wanted to do is just point out 1 or 2 shortcuts in terms of how, you know, one can get into sort of the OERu planning. And if you go to Wiki Educator's homepage, on the main navigation on the top of the page, you would see a link there to OERu planning. And you know, to get to where all the action is at, one just, you know, clicks on the OERu planning page, and then you'll be introduced to more confusion. But you know, if you're experiencing confusion, that's fine. It means you're part of an international organization that is busy with planning, and all our planning is actually conducted from the planning link. And there's a lot of activity, but I just want to highlight 2 things today, which are critically important if you want to engage and participate and help shape OERu futures. The one link is at the top of the page. There is the communications link. And if you click on that communications link, you'll be directed to a number of open lists we maintain at the OER Foundation. And so there are registration particulars there to all the open lists we maintain. And depending on your particular interests, I strongly recommend that you actually subscribe to these open lists, you know, to be part of this planning process. The second link I want to highlight is a link at the top of the OERu planning page. It's called Quick Links. It's a bit of a cop-out. It's sort of a navigation within a navigation, but this is extremely useful if you're wanting to find your way around the OERu. Now, please don't look at the graphic or visual design. It is far from what what a good design needs to be. This is really just a visual access page. And so the sort of the yellow sections are the structural components around the OER University. We are currently at the moment conducting an open strategic planning process. There's a whole strategic planning consultation, which you'll find access links from this quick links page. And anybody is, and everyone is invited to provide feedback on the development of this high-level strategic plan. So I want to encourage Unisa colleagues as members of a founding anchor partner institution to feel free, if you have any comments on that strategic plan, to jump in and, and post in the wiki and help us shape these futures. The structures of the OERu is we have what is called an OERu management committee, and this is an open sort of committee that is comprised of the conveners of a whole range of different working groups, and anybody is free to join any one of these working groups. So all I'm just is an open invitation to say, hey, if you want to help shape some of these futures, you can join any one of these groups or comment at any time to help shape these futures. And the secret to be able to gain access to that is through these communication links on the communication page, as I illustrated. And the last thing, and this relates a little bit to the Open Content Licensing for Educators course. I mean, the history of this course is actually quite interesting. It was originally funded with a little bit of funding from UNESCO to develop a course around copyright, open content licensing, OERs, and Creative Commons licensing. And paradoxically, at the time, notwithstanding all this work that had been done around Creative Commons, there was not a single course available under CC BY license covering all these aspects. And so with a little bit of funding from UNESCO, we worked collaboratively with folk on the Open Courseware Consortium, folk from Creative Commons, volunteers from the Wiki Educator community, volunteers from the OER Foundation, and we developed this course. And it's gone through multiple iterations. It's had a very incremental design. We've run it with small cohorts of 150, 300 learners, up to cohorts of over 1,000 learners. And so with each iteration, we have tried new things and learned a lot in terms of refining the design. I'm not suggesting that the design is perfect, but it's all about refining these open design questions, that Alice referred to earlier on. How do we design for these open learning environments with different cohorts? And these are the experiments we've been running. And the next iteration of the Open Content Licensing for Educators course is focusing on two prototype elements that we're going to be testing. One is within the wiki. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, we use the wiki as a collaborative authoring environment. It's not a delivery environment. So what we've been experimenting with is how we can take a simple content outline like this, which is really just a table of contents of individual wiki pages, and then automatically produce. I wonder if I've got an example open here. Most probably not. Oh, that's unfortunate. Just give me a second.
Front communications.
Yeah, no, not to worry.
I'll send you the link.
Oh, okay. I can send you these links via email afterwards.
Yeah, please. I'll send you the email of everybody's email.
Yeah, that'll help Alice, and then I'll send you links to these things that I'm showing here. So basically, what I'm wanting to show is we can take a simple content outline. Where did I put it? Here. A simple content outline like this, which is essentially a table of contents, and then render a totally different navigation that can apply its own CSS and custom style sheet, with its own navigation and all that. What I'm showing you here isn't the perfect version of what this should look like, right? Because we're testing a slightly different technology of stripping all the wiki sort of Chrome and redundant navigation elements to be able to build a customizable CSS template. So that's one of the aspects we're going to be prototyping in this course. So it's really about, thinking, do we have the structural elements of this open environment right? So it's not going to be the perfect visual design, because that's part of the process. But what this will enable us to do is, once we know that the structures are right, we will be able to develop customizable style sheets that Unisa or any one of our partners would be able to use. So that's the one element we're going to be testing, and why I'm excited that we have a number of the Unisa folk, just to be able to participate in some of these sort of high-level structural elements, to say, well, hey, does this course design or format work? Because we use a number of interesting features with these aggregated feeds and the like. So that's one element. The other element we are prototyping is, we were very fortunate, we were selected this year to host a Google Summer of Code project. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Google Summer of Code, but in the Northern Hemisphere summer months, Google allocates a bunch of resources to students to develop code for a number of open source projects. And we were fortunate to be selected as one of the Google Summer of Code projects. And we have a student from IIT Hyderabad, a third-year student, who's helping us develop some prototype technologies for peer evaluation. And so we're going to be testing some of these things. They will be buggy. They're not going to be perfect. but this is really about getting the first iterations to figure out, well, okay, how do we start making peer learning work for audiences outside the physical sciences. So these are the two aspects we're going to be prototyping. So having folk that have background in sort of these learning design issues would be extremely beneficial in taking these projects forward. So that's basically all I wanted to say from my side, and I sort of just give a bit of an overview. And hey, I'd love to see you guys in the wiki.
Okay. All right. I suppose is the main communication by email until the course starts.
Yes. So
next week, isn't it?
Yeah. So what will happen is because this is part of prototyping, the actual registration link will be posted very close to the startup date. So you will receive an email. The folk have registered interest, to be part of this course. We've got all those registrations, and we will send an email notification. Go to this page, and and register, and then we take it from there.
Okay, cool. Any other questions from Unisa side? Well, the 8 of us anyway. The small Unisa core.
Can I just ask
Hinty's got one
question? And that is, you mentioned that the assessment is done in the partner institutions, and that does include the accreditation as well, Wayne?
Correct.
Summative, yeah. Because
what type of accreditation is planned or is offered currently?
The accreditation that leads to real degrees. No, I'm being a tad facetious. So different courses will use different assessment models for the summative assessment. Some of our early prototypes developed by the University of Southern Queensland used for want of a better word, a portfolio type of assessment. So there would have been 3 summative assignments, right? Which the learners would have had to produce. And in the case of the University of Southern Queensland, the 3, if they successfully completed the 3 assignments, they then qualified, for credit towards that course at the University of Southern Queensland. And in fact, we had a very interesting example that a student who was enrolled with Thompson Rivers University in Canada actually took the course, the OERu version of the course. It completed the assessments that were designed by the University of Southern Queensland, and they were assessed by the University of Southern Queensland, and those credits were applied towards her degree at Thompson Rivers University. So it's not big numbers yet, but we have at least one authentic example of a learner that has gone through the entire assessment process across international boundaries. But different institutions will be using different models. Some institutions will be using a challenge examination model, so they will complete all the learning and sort of peer learning activities through the OERu, and then go and sit, for example, the Unisa challenge exam. Other institutions might use this wouldn't work for all disciplines. I'm thinking particularly of institutions like Excelsior College, who run automated assessments, particularly for freshman level or introductory level courses, would be able to go and sit at any one of the testing centers, a challenge examination. So there are a variety of sort of summative assessment models that are emerging. But within the OERu model, each of our partner institutions retains decision-making autonomy over all aspects of the assessment. So in the case of Unisa, any learners coming through the OERu wanting to get credentialized at Unisa would have to meet credential or evaluation models that meet the policies and requirements of Unisa that are mapped to Unisa's courses. So that's how the model works on an international scale.
That'd be our RPL policies, recognition of prior learning, and whatever. Unisa's got a whole range.
It could be either or. Some might be that students actually go and sit the challenge exam for that particular subject, as a normal examination run through Unisa, or it might be credit transfer through an RPL or articulation agreement within the OERu network. And so, in fact, we have a working group that is actually working through all these challenges at an international level. And Alice, you'd appreciate this. A 3-credit course in the US system is roughly about 120 notional learning hours, against, let's say, 150 notional learning hours in Australia, versus, I'm not sure what Unisa's unit notional learning hours are. But I mean, the size of and so this is one of the reasons why we are actually implementing what we call micro open online courses. It's a little bit of a hack and tease with sort of the big open online courses. But what we're effectively doing is we're dividing courses up into chunks, if you will, of roughly about 40 to 50 notional learning hours, which is a respectable, sort of learning unit. But this is a mechanism that helps us articulate on an international scale. So, by example, 3 micro OERu courses in the North American system would equal 4 micro courses here in sort of the New Zealand and Australian system. So it's one of the mechanisms we're using to help address these international articulation challenges.
Thank you, Wayne. That was very interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, and Henty, you can help shape those futures. I mean, we haven't got the answers to all the questions, and we need smart folk like yourself to help us find them.
Wayne, I think what is very interesting is, for me, a more interesting challenge is how would you put this into a curriculum? I think there's going to be a lot of resistance on that score unnecessarily, because if it's not in a curriculum, you can't get credit for it.
Exactly.
But there are electives.
Yeah, and so I think Alice is starting to point in the right direction there. Rather than us trying to solve the most difficult problems now, let's solve the easy ones first. And so then the inference is that we develop courses that fit within electives easily, as opposed to a very rigid and strict curriculum structure. I mean, we need to recognize we're not going to solve all these problems because it's an extremely complex, challenge. So, I mean, let's focus on the problems we can solve here and now. And by doing that, we're going to have a better knowledge of how to solve the bigger problems.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Wayne.
Yeah, let me not take up more of your time. I mean, it was really great to connect. And, I'll send you those links, and I'll see you folk online.
Okay, see you later.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Wayne.
see you. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.